Anyway, all I was trying to say is that like a lot of people, when I tell them things outside of mainstream Christian doctrine, they fully spiral, and I'm not gonna lie, I just send them to you. I'm like, all right, well, go check out my boy Sean from Kingdom and Context, and then we let them spiral. But we have a pretty captivating title. You sent me a list of a couple ideas, and I definitely thought this was an awesome sounding title. So if you want to just kind of give people context as to even what the title means, maybe, and then you take it away and lead the show, brother.
Yeah. So we did a couple years ago. We started this series called Investigating Babylon, and it ended up being 21 parts. And so each part is like 2 to 3 hours. It's a playlist on our channel. And so if you just want to binge something, like it's like 2 seasons of a Netflix show, you can just go through and you can binge all 21 parts. And what we do is we look at the historical stuff. Many of the stuff that we're going to talk about tonight is from that series. Now imagine 33 plus hours of content I'm going to try to talk about in 2 or 3 hours tonight. So I'm going to have to give you the highlights, the summaries. If you want to see the entire series of Investigating Babylon, you have to go to the playlist on our channel. But we also, after we finished that and we came to the final conclusion of the series, which a lot of people were very surprised by the final conclusion, which we are going to talk about tonight, I then decided people needed more depth because I just given them broad brush strokes of historical overview and scriptural overview. And so now we started a new series we've been doing for the last year. It's called the 42 series. And we've already done like 6 or 7 installments. And it's going to be another 21 parts where I go even deeper into how the occult works, how they deceive you, their philosophy, their mindset, how it's contradictory to scripture. And of course, how the creator through his son, Jesus of Nazareth, is going to destroy them at his return and bring the world to peace. That's why it's called 42 months leading up to the return of Messiah. So it's like a very in-depth, advanced level series. So the Investigating Babylon series is a great starter series to kind of give you a fast, speed dunk into this type of information that most churches don't talk about. So hopefully you guys enjoy it tonight.
Awesome, bro. Yeah, I will say, dude, I was watching one the other day. I had to drive a lot. I was watching a few of your videos, and you start to see that like this may make people spiral, right? But like modern Christianity, even specifically Catholicism, it's just rebranded Babylonian magic. And then people throw the word black and white and good and bad magic around like that means something. And dude, the amount of similarities with modern Catholicism and Babylon was blowing my mind, bro. I mean, that's all I'll say without too many spoiler alerts, and we'll see what you talk about, but it was crazy. There's no way it's a coincidence. So yeah, and I will say before we get into everything, I've been trying to tell people that's kind of what my research has also shown me, not just through your channel, just every time you research powerful groups and powerful ideologies of today, you get back to Babylon. So it's like all roads lead to Rome. Well, that road leads to Babylon, and they all go to Babylon, and that's what they're trying to bring back, I believe, right, is Babylon. And then we're told that basically, the resurgence of Babylon will occur. So yeah, I think that's a serious red pill, if you will, to when you find out that actually these people are Babylonians.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. People may thinking the term Babylonian, or I may talk about the Tower of Babel, and they may think of a specific location, a specific people group, a specific government, but that's not the empire of Babylon. So this is what we're going to talk about, the empire throughout history, how it took on different forms of, like different facelifts, if you will, how it represented its core ideology through different cultures. And there's a syncretism there that is evident that modern scholars are admitting now, that basically I'm excited to review the information with you tonight.
Awesome. Very cool. So I'll go ahead and pop up your screen, and then we'll swap over here. Nice. There we go. All right, brother, take it away.
Cool. All right. So this, I think it's on screen. I'm looking at the YouTube channel to see if it popped up.
It should be. Yeah, it should be. Your PowerPoint is on screen.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, okay. So basically, this was episode 1 that we did, the city and the tower. We talked about the Tower of Babel and the city and the people that lived there to build the city. The Book of Jubilees says it took approximately 42 years to build the Tower of Babel to the height of approximately 1.5 miles. That would be converted to our modern, our modern standards of measurement. So just for some perspective, that's like almost 3 full Burj Khalifas. It's like 3 of them stacked on top of each other, right? Because they're about a half a mile tall. So it was a massive building that they claim to have built over a 42-year span, the majority of the people on earth at that time. And then, of course, it says that Yahweh, Genesis 11, he came down, he saw what they were doing, and he overthrew them. So, and it was destroyed, and the people were dispersed, and this is where the etymology of languages came from, which even modern etymologists admit there's this weird moment about 4,000 years ago when all these languages just seem to explode out of nowhere with no previous track record of where they came from. So it's pretty fascinating. We also talk about the most powerful weapon in episode 2. We talk about the science of giants. We're going to get into some of those concepts as well tonight. Episode 4 was ancient flying machines. We're going to talk about that tonight. Home of the gods, as well as the scorpion pit. So we went through all 21 episodes. As you can, maybe pause if you want to. Now, part 11, which episode 11, part 2, which is Babylon's Art of War, part 2. You actually cannot find this on YouTube. They've removed it, so you have to go to our Rumble channel if you want to watch that one. Then we did a whole episode with Witsit. You were a guest on this one, talking about NASA. And then we continued on all the way up to 21 episodes of Investigating Babylon. And then we're currently doing the 42 series, which goes into much more depth and relative, with modern culture, media, and different concepts. So we've done several episodes here on the 42 series if you want to watch those. But I wanted to just start really tonight by going over a very potent verse in a little known book in the Bible called Ecclesiastes. It's in chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And it says, "What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there a case where one can say, look, this is new? It's already existed in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of those who came before, and those yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow after." So this is a crazy claim the Bible makes of a principle that says it's all been done before. There's nothing new under the sun. So how could they make that claim and actually be accurate? So let's look at it. So tonight we're going to talk about giants, both before and after the flood of Noah. We're going to talk about the Vajra, which is the most powerful weapon in Babylon. We'll talk about telos, which are automatons throughout history. And we're going to talk about Vimanas, which are what we would now call modern day UFOs or UAPs. We'll talk about their historical nature. We'll talk about Zeus, Anubis, and Osiris, which is absolutely relevant to the book of Revelation. We're going to talk about eclipses, otherwise known as the Eye of Ra. And we're going to talk about Mother Babylon, Dragon's Lair, which is the title of tonight's show. So let's jump into the giants real quick, both before and after the flood. So in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, many people are aware of this story. The sons of God, rebellious angels, took wives of their choice, and had offspring through them. Those offspring were considered giants, and they were called the Nephilim in the Hebrew, which means the fallen ones. And so this is very interesting because there is special creation that was not intended by the Creator, and we'll go into more depth with that later. So Jubilees 5, 1 through 7, it also talks about the same story. And it's another account, basically letting you know the same story. So we have a second witness, a second corroboration, and this very specifically talks about the angels who did not stay within the domain they were given in heaven. They came to the earth because they were supposed to come down here and help mankind, which is the job of angels, by the way, according to Hebrews 1:14. But instead, they saw some women they liked. They got caught up with some shorties. They started going into full-on reprobate, apostate, faithlessness, and destruction. And then ultimately turning on mankind in the practices that they were introducing. So we have a New Testament reference to this and a testimony to this as well. 2 Peter 2, 4, and 5. God didn't spare the angels when they sinned, but he cast them deep into Tartarus, placing them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. And if he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness among the eight. So this is just giving you that immediate context to let you know these angels in the flood context were sent to Tartarus. Now, we're going to get into some of the specifics because these angels, all but one of them, was sentenced to Tartarus. And the book of Enoch goes into better explanation about that. Also, the New Testament witness of Jude, verse 6, the angels didn't keep their own domain, but instead now are being punished in eternal chains of darkness, waiting for the great day of judgment. So in 1 Enoch 6, 1 through 6, it talks about the same story of Genesis and Jubilees, And it gives you the idea that when children of men had multiplied in those days, there were born of them beautiful and comely daughters. The angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them and said to one another, "Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men and beget us children." Samyaza, who was their leader, he said unto them, "I fear you will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin." So they knew what they were doing right off the bat. They knew what they were about to sin right off the bat. And he wants his fellow watchers, his fellow angels that came with him, to basically do this with him so he wouldn't be alone. And he says, they all answered him and they said, "Let us all swear an oath and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing." So this is where I'm going to expound throughout tonight to say, if you just think that it's just because they saw some attractive women and the plan was, hey, we're going to take wives for ourselves and that's all we're doing, that you're missing the more subtleties of this particular text, right? So they had a bigger plan, and we see in the next verses in the next chapter how that bigger plan started to unfold as they made humanity their enemy. Okay? Because when they took wives, the children that they had were not humanity. They were Nephilim. And the Nephilim became the oppressors of mankind. So this was a bigger plan than just, hey, we want to have a girl and know the creature comforts of a woman. So they swore an oath all together, and they bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon that oath. They were in all 200 who descended in the days of Jared on Mount Hermon, and they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. So the Mount of the Oath is what Mount Hermon is called, and it's in northern Israel today. It's actually a literal geographical location on the border of Syria and in Israel today. Oh, and by the way, there's a United Nations base facility on the mountain with satellites pointing to the sky.
Totally.
So what's that?
Totally a coincidence.
I'm sure it's a coincidence. And by the way, Austin, you want to chime in, ask questions, make a comment, let me know. Just jump in, brother. First Enoch 7, 1-6, it goes on to expound a little bit more about what was going on during these times and how the chaos started unfolding. This is before the flood. When they took wives, now this is where it gets interesting, because it says, all of those together with them took unto themselves wives, each chose for themselves one. They began to go in unto them and to defile themselves with them. They taught them charms and enchantments, the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. They became pregnant, that's the women, became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. When men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. They began to sin against the birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. So the creation itself starts rebelling because these people are not abiding in the behavior that the inhabitants of the earth were created to do. So there's a principle in the scripture that goes over this in great depth, that if you don't do the behavior that this creation is supposed to do, the land itself is going to go against you, and you're going to have, tons of societal problems as well. So when you go into the Hebrew and you look up the word enchantments, you can see that there's many different renderings for the word enchantment: the latim, the keshapim, the lahashim, or the nahashim, and even the keber. And all these are used in different spots to mean something that's covered, secret arts, trickery, incantation, sorcery. There's some scriptural references there, as you can see if you want to pause the video. Also charming, as in of serpents. It's also used for enchantments, for omens, and then also for magical spells. So this is what they began to teach mankind, and specifically use them on the women whom they were getting pregnant. And then, no coincidence, the women then started creating giants when they were birthing. Deuteronomy 18, 9-12, this is where the creator of heaven and earth is directly telling Israel, hey, do not interpret omens, practice sorcery, cast spells, consult a medium or a spiritist, or inquire the dead. Whoever does these things are detestable to the Lord. Also, do not let no one among you sacrifice his son or daughter in the fire to false gods. So all these practices were actually started before the flood. And most pastors don't really talk about that, because it depends on what type of church they're in and whether they take the book of Enoch seriously and the book of Jubilees seriously or not. And that could depend on which branch of Christianity that has which type of canonized Bible. But the ancient Israelite literature of First Enoch and Jubilees, and even the Testament of 12 Patriarchs, they all have a synonymous witness about this historical event that was happening. So it's a fascinating thing. Isaiah 47, 1 through 5. This is a unique reprimand against the daughter of Chaldea, which is the daughter of Babylon, in the days of Isaiah. It says, "Go down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon." And I'm stressing this because it's going to make a lot more sense at the end of this show tonight, because we're going to talk about Mother Babylon. So the Creator, through the prophet Isaiah, is reprimanding daughter Babylon. It says, "Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of Chaldea, for you'll no longer be called tender or delicate. Take millstones and grind flour, remove your veil, strip off your skirt, bare your thigh and wade through the streams. Your nakedness will be uncovered and your shame will be exposed. I'll take vengeance, I'll spare no one. Our Redeemer Yahweh of hosts is his name, is the Holy One of Israel. Sit in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of Chaldea, for you will no longer be called the Queen of Kingdoms. These two things will overtake you in a moment, in a single day, a loss of children and widowhood. They'll come upon you in full measure, in spite of your many sorceries and the potency of your spells. You were secure in your wickedness. You said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and knowledge led you astray. You told yourself, I am, and there is none besides me. But disaster will come upon you. You will not know how to charm it away. A calamity will befall you that you will not be able to ward off. Devastation will happen to you suddenly and unexpectedly. So take your stand with your spells. This is actually the Creator taunting Babylon's magicians and sorcerers. He says, so take your stand with your spells and with your many sorceries, with which you have wearied yourself from your youth. Perhaps you will succeed. Perhaps you will inspire terror. He's being very, very, very facetious here. Sarcastic. You are wearied by your many counselors. Let them come forward now and save you. Your astrologers who observe the stars, who monthly predict your fate. Surely they're like stubble. The fire will burn them up. They can't deliver themselves from the power of the flame. There'll be no coals to warm them or fire to sit beside. This is what they are to you, those with whom you have labored and traded from youth. Each one strays in his own direction. Not one of them can save you. So this is in this type of sarcastic reprimand to Babylon and its leaders and its sorcerers and magicians. It is letting you know, since its youth, since Babylon's youth, it's labored in sorcery and magic. So what does this matter? Why was I showing, as I was reading these verses, I was showing hieroglyphs of giants erecting obelisks in Egypt. I was showing busts of giants fighting chimeras in Greece. These are historical busts. And then also from Babylon, I'm showing a king that's like 2.5 times the size of the men that are coming before him. Right? Showing you that there's giants in all these different lands. And this is after the flood. So a lot of people always try to figure out, how are there giants before the flood, but then they all got judged? Only 8 people, Noah, his whole family, the only 8 people that lived and survived. And then suddenly after the flood, the giants pop up again. How does this happen? There's a lot of theories to this. Some people want to claim the theory that there was another rebellious group of angels that came down and started making giants again, but that's actually unnecessary. You don't need that. The book of Enoch has already told you how they made them, and we're going to go over that right now. So as I showed before, as we saw up here, the rebellious angels, they came and they took wives and they taught them charms, enchantments, and the cutting of roots and made them acquainted with plants. The very next sentence is they became pregnant with giants. So let's look at plants. Let's look at their biology. What are the key growth regulators that we find in plant roots? This is just a general search anybody could do. This is not special information. And there's 5 growth hormones that are in all trees and plant roots. One's auxins, cytokinins, ethylene, gibberellins, and brassinosteroids, also sometimes referred to as abscisic acids. So all these determine how much root grows, how thick the stem gets, how much the stem grows tall before it starts sprouting a leaf, how big the leaves are. All these are growth regulators in 5 different ways for plants and trees. So real quick, we're going to look at something about A13. Austin, have you ever heard of A13?
I have not. No.
I don't know if you. Oh, you're still there. Okay. Yeah. So A13. I'm going to see if I can share this. I'm not sure.
And sorry, there'll occasionally be a delay just because I'm making sure I'm muted so that you don't echo. So I have to make sure I'm mute. But I've never heard of it. No, I'm just impressed you didn't butcher those words right then.
So this is a short little compilation, guys. This is just like a reel or a TikTok compilation, just to give you a brief idea of what the world thinks A13 is. They think it has to do with adrenochrome, okay? But I'm going to actually show you what it really has to do with, and so it's a little deeper than that. So I'm going to press play on here. There's no sound. And is there any way to make this larger? The screen larger? The share screen? Or is it already larger? Oh, you already got it. My bad. You already got it highlighted.
It's a little big, but for it to be on your end, you would have to actually change the size of the window.
Okay, there we go. So it's just going to go through like different Pixar and Disney movies, where A13 is like subliminally put in the background of all. A113 is in the background or somewhere in all of these. And this little video did a great job kind of highlighting these everywhere that they found it. I think that's Finding Nemo. The Incredibles. So I don't want to get you like copyright or pulled down, so I got it muted, but there's that creepy music playing, you know, that you see all the TikTok videos.
Yeah.
But it's funny because in all these videos, A113 is everywhere in all these videos. All these cartoons.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. It's adrenochrome.
I know, right? That's what this video thinks it is as well. I mean, it's not a bad guess. We know that they layer stuff in film and media. This one even went like old school Roman numerals. I think that movie was called Brave. Of course, Monsters.
Yeah, because that's all about some creepy stuff.
Yeah, Monsters is filled with it, isn't it? This one's pretty creative right here. I would never have found this one. The design of the gate of the fence. So people in the live chat are thinking maybe it means 33, you know, the good old Masonic number. It's on the license plate. It's on the door of this office door. It's everywhere in all these vehicles, all these Pixar shows and cartoons. So when you look it up, a lot of people will be like, "Oh, look, if you look up the chemical compound," and I've done that. So I'm going to show you the screen. I screenshot when I actually looked it up, so we can look at it together. All right. And where did the slides go? There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some. I think I've heard some normie cover for one of these where it's like it's actually just a room in Disney or something like that. You know, like it's the room they all go to or something.
Yeah. So when you Google it, the first thing that'll pop up is adrenochrome. Even though they'll say that there's nothing technically associated with it, but this is what the conspiracy is that it's somehow connected to adrenochrome. But actually, if you look closely from an actual government website, it's connected to gibberellins. It's the chemical compound structure of gibberellins. Gibberellin A113. So what did we talk about earlier? What are the 5 growth inhibitors that are the part of roots of plants that the fallen angels taught to mankind? And then suddenly we got giants. One of them is gibberellins. And actually, gibberellins was the core early ingredient that was used in Miracle Grow back in the 1960s. So the gibberellins is also found in something called Raphanus sativus, which is basically just a radish. It's a root vegetable. So we have scientific confirmation of this claim from 1 Enoch chapter 6. And for some weird reason, we've got Pixar and Disney putting this particular number associated with gibberellins into a ton of their subliminal programming in their videos. But this was a part of the charms, enchantments, the cutting of roots, and making them acquainted with plants. that we see, these rebellious angels started coming down and causing all this chaos with mankind, creating giants. The giants became massive and acquired the acquisitions of men, which turns into the oppression of mankind, where they start devouring them. And they also sinned against the bird, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and then began devouring one another's flesh and drinking blood. Mass, full-on chaos. This is where the stories of the chimeras, the hybrid animals, come into play. And it can be accomplished through changing the growth regulators that's just in plants. Now, my theory is that they're given to, like, they would cut the roots, get out the growth hormones, and then give them to the woman when she's in gestation, so it affects the baby. I don't know how it's done. This is just like an overview statement of what they did. I don't know the actual science of how it's done. That would be the sorcery part, the enchantment part. So I'm glad I don't know how it's done. And even if I did, I wouldn't be publicly telling anyone else how to do it. So now that we're establishing some baselines here. So now that we have this idea of how they made giants both before and after the flood. You don't need the fallen angels to be here every single time. The idea is that they copulated with women, which, Austin, that brings up a whole question that a lot of pastors and seminaries refuse to address, which is that angels have real bodies. So
but aren't they always presented as people, like almost every time?
Yeah, they are. I would even say, even in Ezekiel 1, 8, and 10, I think that it's a very poor translation that turns them into these big spheres with eyes that goes around them. I think I did a whole video on this about looking into the Hebrew and the Greek, as far as specifically how that's just a bad translation, and they're actually a part of the Ophanim class of angels, which actually has a dual meaning. The word ophan is the word for wheel in Hebrew, and so that's where I think the mistake comes in, that people think that, oh, they must be shaped like a wheel and not actual real person. You know what I mean? So there's multiple classes of angels. There's the Ophanim, the Seraphim, the Cherubim, and the Watchers. And so these Watchers were like the lowest class of angels that were sent down to the earth in order to help mankind govern themselves, because they become numerous. This is the full story that you get from Enoch and Jubilees. And like we read, some of them went off mission, right? And they got caught up finding some women attractive, but then it turned into a much bigger thing, which then they became a full-on assault against mankind. And so we're going to go over, I'm laying some groundwork. I'm going to go back to that story here in a few minutes and explain which one of the angels did not get sent to Tartarus and was still here after the flood and why it matters. But real quick, let's look at something called the Vajra, which is considered the most powerful weapon in ancient Babylon. So this is something that you see most readily spoken about, or most, I should say, there's no ambiguity of how this is mentioned in the Vedic texts from ancient India. And the Vajra was the weapon of Lord Indra. It was a powerful device that could not only destroy the enemy in the form of attacking flying machines, but it also had the ability to cause rain and was a symbol of fertility. So the Vajra itself is a thunder of 1,000 blades, or lightning. And it's forged from iron or gold mixed with bronze or stone. So it's actually a type of a weapon that they claimed had to do with lightning and could control or take the form of a flying machine to attack. That's crazy, right? Because we're talking 4,000 years ago Vedic texts written in Sanskrit. So they still have, trinkets of the Vajra today that you can find if you go to, Nepal, or if you go to China, or if you go to Japan, different parts of Asia. They still have the Vajra everywhere in different forms. It has a different look it takes on, depending on the artistic style. Here on the right-hand side, you have Lord Indra, which is one of the Indian gods, who is considered the god of war, and he has a specific style of Vajra that he called the Vajra staff. Here's a modern artistic painting of Lord Indra holding a special Vajra, which is conducting the lightning, because he was considered a god of war who controlled lightning. Here is another modern depiction from a Bollywood movie of Lord Indra holding the Vajra in his hand as he's attacking, with lightning coming down over from heaven. So just to let you know, the Indians, there is no ambiguity in what the Indians believed. This particular quote unquote little g god, who was a god of war, and he had a specific device that allowed him to somehow manipulate lightning, use it for some sort of remote control over a machine, as well as it could affect the weather. Here's an ancient stela from Greece that is depicting Zeus, also holding a Vajra. So we go from India all the way over to the Middle East and to the Mediterranean to Greece. This is like a clay pot that they had an ancient painting that was preserved of Zeus holding a Vajra, which they called his lightning rod. Here's another one. Now this one's fascinating because it looks much more complicated than the other Vajras. Like I said, they took on different artistic forms. But this particular one that Zeus is holding on the far left of the screen, he's fighting some sort of, I think it was Typhon, this like snake-like god in ancient Greece that was like a chimera that Zeus was fighting in this story. They put this on this clay pot. And you can see it's not just like any normal, it's like it opened up a little bit. It's like part of it opened up and it has a unique design to it because it had multiple designs. So this one, it's actually longer than in other pictures. So it's like extended in some way. So this is some sort of thing that they claimed helped him have his control, direct, and attack with lightning. So Lord Indra had a staff that was a Vajra. Neptune also has a staff that's of a Vajra, Roman god, who's the equivalent of like Zeus. And then Baal of the Canaanites also was considered the storm god of thunder and lightning, who also is depicted in busts with a Vajra in his hand. So now we're finding synchronicity between ancient India, Greece, and the Canaanites in Mesopotamia. And Elon Musk has a Vajra replica on his nightstand. I just thought this was just funny to me. Because you know how we don't believe that Elon is legit getting all this money from SpaceX to run his stuff. But here he is with a public photo he released. He's got a little Vajra on the corner of his nightstand. So in Leviticus 26, 17 through 20, Yahweh is explaining what happens if you're in covenant with him, but you decide you want to stop doing covenant behavior and you want to go live after the ways of Babylon or the ways of Canaan. Basically, you want to live in sin, right? You want to live in destructive ways. And how the creation will start acting towards you. So he says, I'll set my face against you so that you'll be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you will rule over you. You will flee when no one pursues you. And after all this, you will not obey me. And if after all this you will not obey me, I will proceed to punish you sevenfold for your sins. I'll break down your stubborn pride and make your sky like iron and your land like bronze. That's famine. And your strength will be spent in vain. Your land will not yield its produce, and the trees of the land will not bear their fruit. Again, in the wisdom of Solomon, about 1,000 years later, for creation, serving you who made it, exerts itself to punish the unrighteous, and in kindness it relaxes on behalf of those who trust in you. Christ himself in Matthew chapter 8, 23 through 27. He says, when Jesus got into the boat, his disciples followed him. Suddenly a violent storm came upon the sea, so that the boat was engulfed by the waves, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him and said, Lord, save us, we're perishing. You of little faith, Jesus replied, why are you so afraid? And then he got up and rebuked the winds and the sea, and it was perfectly calm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the sea obey him. Well, this man was righteous. That's the point of Christ. He was without sin. He followed the ways of the Father perfectly. And therefore, the promise, or go back to Wisdom of Solomon real quick, the promise that's stated both in the covenant in Leviticus as well as succinctly stated in the Wisdom of Solomon is that the creation will relax itself on your behalf for those who are righteous, for those who trust in the Creator. That's what righteousness means, is you trust in the Creator because you walk in his ways. So Christ, of course, does that perfectly. This is why miracles flowed through him so easily. We also see James chapter 5, the same thing. He's talking about a righteous man and how the creation itself reacts. Elijah was a man just like us. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain in the land for 3.5 years. Again, he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth yielded its crops. So you can see this in 1 Kings chapters like 18 through 20. And then a future prophecy in the book of Revelation, chapter 11, about these two witnesses that show up. And it claims they have the power over the sky, over the weather. It says, I'll give power to my two witnesses. They shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. That's 42 months, by the way. These are the two olive trees and the two candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. And if any man will hurt them, fire proceeds out of the mouth and devours their enemies. If any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These men, these two witnesses, have the power to shut heaven, that it does not rain in the days of their prophecy. And they have the power over waters to turn them to blood, to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. So this is a future prophecy that claims the type of prophets that we saw in the Old Testament, that like Moses and Elijah, people that could do these types of miracles and control the creation itself, that two guys will appear with that same type of authority and power again in the future and prophesy for 42 months leading up to the second coming of Christ. And we won't be going into much depth about this tonight, but if you keep reading Revelation, the beast who comes up out of the pit from Revelation 9, the one that's referenced in Revelation 17, that beast ends up killing these two guys 3 days before the return of Christ. So this is where that means for 42 months he couldn't kill them. He had to put up with them controlling the weather. What do we know? Governments of the earth are heavily involved in weather manipulation programs. This is what Leviticus promised, that if you abandon the ways of the Creator, your enemies will rule over you, and there will be famine in the land, and your produce will not yield. Because the enemies, the Empire of Babylon, has always used weather manipulation as a form of warfare. And they will always try to create famine so they can control people. So this is a common thing that happens throughout all of history and is cited all throughout the Bible. So now let's look at another quick thing called telos. So this goes into automatons in history. Before we go too much further, Austin, any questions or thoughts about what we covered so far?
I was double unmuting. Like, I honestly like 500, but I will say one thing I was gonna say. Let me pop over here. So, do you agree? Do you think, like, just so the audience understands, that these were real characters? For example, in the depiction that we're actually fighting, like they physically even fought each other. You think the stories are legit? Like, actual characters were actually fighting each other, like they're being depicted?
I do believe Genesis 11 and Jubilees 10 that there was a real Tower of Babel. And as we go into much, like I said at the beginning tonight, guys, this is a huge overview of 33 plus hours of historical citations and evidence. So in my first episode of Investigating Babylon, I go into the history of the Tower of Babel and how they were already worshiping Jupiter, which is one of the early forms of Zeus. So this is a real character that they were already worshiping. And I'm going to be showing you here in a minute how it is one of the rebellious angels that came down in the days of Jared before the flood, who's still around after the flood. And he has a name and we identify him. They all the testimony from all the ancient Israelite literature, they claim he's a real character. So he's the one that I'm going to be showing you is kind of the top dog amongst the false gods, and that they claim he is a real character. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm just telling you the story as like trying to put together a coherent story throughout all of history to show you what history has already said this whole time. How much of it do people take and believe? That's between you and the Creator. So like, I can just give you the information tonight and say that as much as I've studied this, I've come to believe that these were real characters. Obviously, some of the details may be embellished from historical accounts, right? Because they want to make it seem like their God was awesome, right? We get that. Humans do that all the time. But it's interesting to see the same claims being made by people that supposedly didn't have any contact with each other, according to modern historians. They'll say, well, the Greeks over here, 4,000 years ago, they didn't know the Indians. But yet, they got the same God with the same weapons that do the same things, right? And those same gods do not want you to worship Yahweh, the creator of heaven and earth, over the sons of Shem, the sons of Abraham, the sons of Jacob, the people that Egypt enslaved. The same gods are the same enemies of the Israelites.
I agree, man. It's very fascinating that like all these different like over this huge geographical span, all these people are referencing like the same character with a different name, with the same characteristics, with the same descriptions, with the same weapons, with the same histories, but they supposedly had no relation to each other. They didn't know each other, different languages, etc. So yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Deuteronomy 18.
Say again?
Remember, I read Deuteronomy 18, and I was kind of showing you that the enchantments, the sorceries, the spells, the things that were being taught by the rebellious angels to mankind before the flood, we see in Deuteronomy 18, those same things are being reprimanded for men not to do after the flood. And it's because all the nations that were within the empire of Babylon, they were all practicing the same behaviors. And it's the ones that in Leviticus 18 through 20, and also in Deuteronomy 18, that Yahweh's telling the Israelites, don't be like the nations and don't do all this stuff because it's extremely bad and destructive, and it profanes his holiness, and it's not good. Don't sacrifice your kids. It's not good. You know what I mean? So like all the nations are doing this. So imagine the Tower of Babel. Just for just for an experiment's sake tonight. Let's just say the Tower of Babel story was real, and that everyone spoke the same language at one point because they're all descendants from Noah after the flood. And they decided they didn't want to disperse across the earth because they were in rebellion to God. And instead, they wanted to build a tower to reach the firmament. And this was their motivation, and to kill God so they don't have to worry about being judged again. So while they're doing that, God comes down, disrupts their languages. They end up fighting with each other. The tower gets destroyed. They then disperse, which was what Noah told them to do in the book of Jubilees chapter 8 anyway. They then go and disperse after they get judged at the Tower of Babel back to these other lands because they can't talk to each other now. They all speak a different language, but they still have the same practices. So the same God that they worshipped when they were at the tower and could speak the same language, they then walked away not understanding each other, but still serving the same false God. So then the requirement of that false God, if he wants to maintain control, is he's got to now relate to each new culture and each new language. So this is why you see the same practices of child sacrifice, sorcery, weather manipulation, anything but Yahweh, all being practiced synonymously amongst these different cultures, but now they just speak different languages. And of course they have different clothing styles, and, the Indians were all into makeup, and the Egyptians were into makeup, and, the Egyptians were pretty effeminate and homosexual, and the Greeks were more like, the Chads, and then the Indians were the artisans, and they just had different flares and different cultures, but they all were doing the same stuff that Yahweh said, this is wickedness. And he wanted Israel to be a light to all those nations to teach them how to behave properly.
Yeah, that's some gravy too. And we don't have to fall too far down it, but it's very fascinating when you get into the Georgia Guidestones, which were destroyed, but basically want a one world civilization, unite the world with a single new living language, right? And then when you think about that idea that they were broken up but had worshipped the same gods, so then how would you convey it, right? You would use symbols. So like if you have different languages, you use symbols, and we know that the elite the powers that be, they love their symbology. They communicate in the form of symbols to this day. And so if you and I were once together, but we now suddenly couldn't understand each other, well, I could talk to you without talking to you. I could show you a symbol that everyone understood what that reference, and then the same with depictions of the gods, right? You could show what that person carried around, what they used as weapons, and we would know we're talking about the same God. And it would transcend the language and the cultural separation, which is pretty fascinating. It's quite a bit of gravy, the overlap to now, right? When you're talking about murdering babies and you're talking about controlling the weather, and I mean that's what people do now, right? So
yeah. So remember the ancient Indians? They talked about Shiva, whom is the statue outside of CERN. The statue that has, multiple arms, that's inside this weird circle and is standing on a baby.
Yeah.
That statue of Shiva outside of CERN. Well, Shiva had what they called a consort in Indian mythology or Indian theology. Shiva had a different version. Sometimes they called it a consort, other times they called it an avatar, to where it was a different representation of Shiva, but it was a female. And so this is where do you remember the goddess that has her tongue sticking out? And she's got her mouth covered in blood?
Mm-hmm.
That is the female consort version of Shiva, the male god, in ancient India. And as you know, I'm going blank on her name right now. If anyone knows in the live chat, tell me, especially if anyone that's from my audience. I'm going blank on her name right now. But she's the Indian goddess who was bloodthirsty, who was known for being a cannibal and specifically towards children, and being they put this female goddess's face on the Empire State Building in New York in like 2018.
Cali.
Kali, yeah, that's right, Kali.
Is that where you get California?
No, you remember in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom? You remember the death cult that's trying to get his heart out? They're chanting Kali, Kali.
Wow,
So
that's crazy.
this
Was it like
yeah.
depicted as like a big black chick? Because I'm pretty sure there's like a goddess that California was named after that was like black. You ever heard that?
Yeah, well, in India they have different shades of brown, and some of them look like they're black because they're pretty
Sure,
dark.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So but yeah, that's Kali is basically Shiva, but just a female version who's a maniac, bloodthirsty version of Shiva. Shiva's called the Destroyer in his male form. So it's crazy. Like there's these weird. And why would New York City? Why would they put Kali with her tongue out, with little demon horns, lit up in the windows of the Empire State Building? Like what's going on, right? So it's like, are you just trolling or what? It makes no sense, right? Everyone in New York claims they're atheists.
Yeah, that's wild.
So
that's wild.
it makes no sense. So not only do we have their practices that the Bible says these are the ways of the nations, it doesn't say these are the ways of just the Babylonians or just the Egyptians. Yahweh says all this destructive behavior, all this like mass polygamy, mass fornication, mass blood drinking and cannibalism and sacrificing your children to false gods. Yahweh says all the nations did this. And so this is why he was trying to, get them out of that behavior and cause them to repent. So what's interesting is we're going to go into more correlations of how they did interact with each other, not only sharing the same story of the same gods, but even the same technology. And so I guess I'll go back to Telos, which is the automatons, real quick, and so we can make time here. But
Oh, cool. Let's do it, man. This is some gravy.
Yeah. So Telos, this is if you ever saw that old movie from like the 60s, it was called Jason and the Argonauts. And it was about these guys that went to this island. There was this massive robot that was like guarding the island. That's a story from ancient Greece about Zeus, who built an automaton named Telos, who guarded his island. And the automaton could fly. And it was powered by this elixir that had a gold tint to it. And I'm sitting there going, that sounds a lot like oil inside of a robot, right? But Lord Indra also, with this Vajra, could take the form of an attack flying machine and control it. So this thing could not only produce a weapon of lightning, it could not only control weather somehow, but it also can control machines. So here's from ancient Greece, approximately 300 to 270 BC. This is a winged talon. This is where we get the word talon. It's from telos. And this is literally, they put this flying robot in the form of an angel on one of their coins back in the day, one of their drachmas. So this is from one of the historical writings of ancient Greece. It says the sacred mount was believed to have a temperate climate. And this is talking about Mount Olympus, where the gods hung out. And it was a temperate climate all year round. The mountains, gorges, lush with forests. The gods did not always reside in their paradise, however, and would depart, or they were to return there via a gate of clouds guarded by Hore, the goddesses of the seasons. Now, the author claims the tables in Zeus's palace on Olympus were made of gold and were actually automatons created by Hephaestus. They moved in and out of the rooms as required by the gods, and Zeus's throne was situated in the Pantheon, the meeting hall of the gods. It was also designed by Hephaestus and was constructed from black marble inlaid with gold. Each of the gods had their own palace on the mountain, usually constructed of gold and marble and situated in a gorge in the mountain peaks. This is describing Mount Olympus, which they said existed in the clouds in the air. The gods met daily at Zeus's palace in the Pantheon, where they held feasts and discussed the fate of the mortals. They drank nectar and ate ambrosia, which perpetuated their immortality. Allegedly, when the gods drank ambrosia, the blood in their veins was replaced by ichor, a substance that was toxic to humans. Ichor also ran through the veins of Talos, the Greek giant automaton. In Greek mythology, Talos, also spelled Telos, or Talon, was a giant automaton commissioned by Zeus and made of bronze to protect Europa and Crete from pirates and invaders. He circled the island shore 3 times daily. Talos was said to have been programmed with the knowledge of the gods. That's crazy. So not only are they claiming 3,000 years ago, the Greeks are claiming that Zeus created an automaton, a moving by itself robot, but that it was programmed with the knowledge of the gods. So that doesn't get more AI than that, in my opinion. Because this thing autonomously guarded an entire island by itself. So they claimed. So in modernity, there's Adrienne Mayer. She's a research scholar at Stanford. She started looking into this because this somehow came in front of her attention. So she says, my research into the first inklings of the scientific impulse took me into the world of mythology where ancient people first envisioned making artificial life and automatons, robots, self-moving devices, and other marvelous things long before the technology made them possible. These stories about robots and other machines in ancient oral traditions were first written down in the time of Homer, about 2,700 years ago, but the Greeks were not the only people to imagine automatons and machines in antiquity. Similar stories exist in the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and other epics. In Hindu myths, automatons are made of the engineer god Vishwakarma and the sorceress Maya. So why is a sorceress making robots? This is what we're talking about. All this technology, all this thought process, all these machinations, this is the downflow of information from rebellious angels that we see from before the flood. So you've got a supposed, a smart engineer as well as a sorceress getting together in ancient India to make robots that moved on their own. In Greek myths, they're made by the god of technology Hephaestus and the brilliant artisan Daedalus. So I consider such myths to be the world's first science fiction stories. This is the researcher from Stanford. She says no single civilization has a monopoly on ancient dreams of advanced technology. Whether one looks at the Greeks, the Etruscans, the Egyptians, the Hindu, the Islamic, the Chinese, or any other ancient culture myth about artificial life. So she just told you that all these other cultures listed all had stories of artificial life, specifically what they called automatons. They all contemplate what wonders might be achieved if only one could possess the divine creativity and ability of the gods. But it's not possible to draw a direct line of development from mythology over millennia to modern scientific knowledge. So, Austin, I know you're already aware. We've got Tesla's trying to make robots, Honda's making robots, Boston Dynamics is making robots. Like, just go down the list, right? You got those police dogs with no heads, that they're making robots out of. And it's their goal to make them as smart, sophisticated, and flexible as possible, right? Where did they get this idea? Why is there continually making movies about automatons, robots that can think and move on their own that want to destroy humanity and take over the world? It's like they keep making. I thought once the Terminator franchise kind of run its course, they would stop making movies about that. Every year, there's a new movie about some rogue machine that's been built, that has some sort of ghost in the machine type thing that is going off of its programming and trying to take over the world and kill humans. These ideas are not new, is what I'm getting at. None of these ideas are new. Just like string theory is not new. It's from ancient India. It goes back to the lotus flower of Brahma. Just like all these concepts, like we're going to talk about Vimanas, the UFOs and UAPs, this is not new information. So this research scholar goes on to say, Indian and Hellenistic cultures borrowed and influenced each other beginning around the 5th century BC, and syncretism intensified after Alexander of Macedon and King Porus began relations in the 4th century BC. So she's telling you that India and Greece had trade relations in the 400 years before Christ, so 2,400 years ago, approximately 2,500 years ago. So the traveling Greek sage Apollodorus of Tyana observed automated servants and self-propelled carts in the court of the ruler of India. And India was centuries ahead of Europe in the technologies of distillation and hydraulics. So here's an ancient, 3,000-year-old depiction on the right-hand side here from India, from one of their Vimanas, with the schematic interior working of some sort of engine system that they had figured out. She goes on to say myths featuring flying chariots and synthetic swans, animated servants, giant robots, machines, and the like appear in the Mahabharata, the Ramayana. I can't say this word. What does it say? Kata Satari Satakara, and the Harizvamsa, and other works. Self-navigating ships appear in Egyptian texts and Homer's Odyssey. Android and animal automatons are described in Homer's Iliad and in Chinese chronicles. The most detailed account is in the Lokopatanari from Burma. After Buddha's death, the story recounts the king of Ajata he preserved his bodily remains in a hidden chamber under the stupa. That's under one of their temples. The precious relics were guarded by Bhutavahana Yantra, which translates spirit moving machines. So
Wow.
this is not some crackpot. This is a research scholar at Stanford who is admitting syncretism between these cultures and is admitting they all shared the same stories with various accounts from seemingly credible people who were part of the king's court and recorded that they saw various types of automatons doing all kinds of things. So in the picture on the right-hand side, you have a picture of the Buddha, and these two looking like these two soldiers on the side were supposed to be the automatons that guarded the relics of this Buddha. So if you're still here with us and you don't think that that's weird enough, so we're gonna dive a little bit deeper. And I promise you guys, it's just a continual spiral into strange history, to where we get to the end of it that makes more relevance to what we're seeing in our culture today. And I hope you're edified by this study. So Vimanas is the study of the ancient history of UFOs and UAPs. So in ancient Chaldea, this is as you can see, the Dagon hat from the fish guy center mass on the screen. You can see 3 people in a thing in the air. So this is the flying machine of ancient Babylon they talk about. And if you look really closely, he's got a Vajra in his hand. What do we talk about the Vajras? They can control machines that fly. That's the claim. So in the laws of the Babylonians, also known as the Code of Hammurabi, the Hakata unambiguously states that the privilege of operating a flying machine is great. The knowledge of flight is among the most ancient of our inheritances, a gift from those upon high. We received it from them as means of saving many lives. This isn't a text that's like 3,000 years old. They're claiming they have the knowledge of flight. It's one of the greatest inheritances they've got. They received it from upon high, from the gods in the heaven upon high, and they were given it to hopefully save lives. So, I mean, to me, this sounds like exactly what we hear today when they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to get this new technology. It's going to be great for you. Like, we're going to put a chip in your brain because it's going to help you walk again." Right? So we need to monitor your brain, and we may actually have to reprogram your brain if possible because chip's got a chip. So like, it's the same story. They want to save lives. Take this advanced tech. Oh, but by the way, we got you on our thumbnail. So there's all types of depiction in ancient India about flying machines called Vimanas. Here's the Shakuna Vimana from ancient India. I can't read the Sanskrit. We're just looking at the picture for now. But in Sanskrit, the word Vimana means measuring out or traversing. So the Bowdoin professor of Sanskrit at Oxford in the 1890s, he translates the word Vimana as the chariot of the gods. And you see here on the left, this is a Sundara Vimana, which is a much bigger one that had multiple levels inside. At Rama's behest, the magnificent chariot rose up to a mountain of cloud with a tremendous din. Another passage reads that the Bhima flew with his Vimana on an enormous ray which was as brilliant as the sun and made a noise like the thunder of a storm. It sounds like a rocket to me, personally. And they actually talk about what these things were powered by, which was a mercury engine or quicksilver, which is something you can mine from the earth. So in the Sanskrit Samarangana Sutrahara, which is an ancient text, it's written that the strong and durable must be the body of the Vimana, like a great flying bird of light material. Inside, one must put the mercury engine with its iron heating apparatus underneath. By means of the power latent in the mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a great distance in the sky. The movements of the Vimana are such that it can vertically ascend, vertically descend, move slanting forwards, and move backwards. With the help of the machines, human beings can fly in the air, and heavenly beings can come down to earth. So, if you're not already wondering, like, why in the world are 4,000-year-old Vedic Sanskrit texts talking about something that has the flight capabilities that we only see within quote-unquote UFOs and UAPs, why is the claim at the very end of it saying, oh, because they can be used for human beings to fly in the air and for heavenly beings to come down to earth? What does that mean? What heavenly beings are coming down to earth in a machine? Because in the Bible, that doesn't happen. In the Bible, an angel shows up without a machine. It shows up usually just, in plain clothes, and people mistake him as a man. Christ himself, when he ascended into heaven, into the firmament, he didn't get into a spaceship. He just ascended because he had a glorified body that's called a spiritual body. He didn't need a mechanism. He didn't need a contraption in order to go up. So we have a very different concept here from what the Bible is describing as far as gods that can come down to the earth in machines. Now, here's what's interesting, Austin, because we're going to talk about this towards the end as well. The Pushpaka Vimana was a gigantic plane the size of a large city, entirely capable of holding unlimited numbers of people, according to Professor D.K. Kanjalilals. I think I butchered the name, but talking about their ancient texts where they went over different types of Vimanas, different types of Indian flying machines. The Pushpaka Vimana could hold lots and lots of people, an entire city. That's a crazy claim. That's a crazy claim. Here's the different types of Vimanas that are recorded in the ancient Vedic texts, translated, and an engineer came and put schematics to them as far as their descriptions. There are many different styles and types. As you can see, the second one on the left looks like a saucer. It's very interesting. But in case you haven't already noticed, the one on the right, it kind of looks like something NASA makes, right? Kind of weird. Then you have some, these same kinds of carvings, these same types of top things that are found in all over India that are recorded with great artwork and detail and hieroglyphs about the ancient flying machines of the gods. And they look like transistors of some sort. It's almost like a Tesla coil on this rock. It looks really weird. There's another Pushpaka Vimana. As you can see, it's a massive one. It seems to have a large smokestack in the middle of it. This is one that's more small, could carry few. But see, the god that they worshipped is this purple guy that's in the center. And then there's a blue guy there, because remember that the Indians had various types of gods and hybrid creature type men / gods that had different colors to them. Whether it was face paint or they had actually different colored skin, I don't know. But this is what they claim consistently, is that they had hybrid creatures, giants, flying machines, and gods that lived in the air. This is the claims of ancient India, matching with the claims of ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon. From 1923, an engineer took a Shakuna Vimana and he actually tried to make a schematic out of it, and this is what he came up with. It's pretty wild. So the Rukma Vimana, it's a special type of Vimana. I always thought it looked exactly like the nose on some of these fake astronaut missions from these Apollo missions. It's very wild. And you might say, well, that's kind of a stretch, Sean. Maybe they just like that design, maybe there's nothing there. But suddenly we have the same type of Shukana Vimanas that are circular spheres, not spheres, but circular discs. That same type of design is being practiced by the U.S. government in the 1950s. They experimented with all types of saucer shapes. This is now declassified documents with pictures from the 1950s trying to figure out how to make propulsion work for this type of craft. They had different designs. This one looks exactly like the Chaldea or the Babylonian hieroglyph that we saw earlier, with the feet sticking out the bottom. I'm going to skip past that so we don't get copyright on the music. But they had different types. And as you can see here, there's nothing new under the sun. It's all the same. It's all the same designs. It's all the same. They're trying to figure out how are these claims being made. The ancient boat of Ra was considered to be flying in the air that would take Ra from horizon to horizon. The patron god of Egypt was Ra and was said to have traversed the sky in a vessel. Remember, the word Vimana means traversing. And he was in a vessel called the Boat of a Million Years. And this is what it was typically depicted as. Here's one in a museum. Here's one that matches an ancient design from ancient India that's floating on the tulip. And that tulip flower is very, very important. It represents Brahma. Brahma was the equivalent of Ra in Egypt. So this is something, actually, you and I I think we already talked about this a couple years ago, but your audience may not know about this, Austin. This is from NASA. This is back in 1985. A researcher named Rick Briggs at NASA, he made waves publishing a paper about AI, and he titled it Knowledge, Representation in Sanskrit and Artificial Intelligence. In the paper, Rick stated that the grammar of the ancient Indian language of Sanskrit, it's structured and rule-based as it was, had significant lessons for the business of natural language understanding. And Briggs suggested that the studying the way ancient Indian grammarians worked might help AI researchers finally solve the natural language understanding. This is back in 1985. He's already working on AI language programming. An excerpt from the paper reads that there is at least one language, which is Sanskrit, which for the duration of from almost 1,000 years was a living spoken language with a considerable literature of its own. Besides works of literature value, there was a long philosophical and grammatical tradition that has continued to exist with undiminished vigor until the present century. Among the accomplishments of the grammarians can be reckoned the method for paraphrasing Sanskrit in a manner that's identical not only in essence, but in the form with current work in artificial intelligence. This article demonstrates that natural language can serve as an artificial language also, and that much work in AI has been reinventing a wheel millennial old. So this researcher in 1985, we all know that there's a lot of lies that come out of NASA. In his paper, researching artificial intelligence and a proper programming language, he was led to Sanskrit, which he said worked perfectly, and he determines that they're just reinventing a wheel that's a millennia old. What did we talk about at the beginning? There's Ecclesiastes 1:9. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything's been done before. What did the Stanford researchers say about her research into automatons and how they were given the knowledge of the gods and could move and do things on their own? They were programmed. So he goes on to talk about that Sanskrit's an ancient language from India. It's from ancient Hindu language, plays an important role in their intellectual communities. The structure of Sanskrit makes it suitable for artificial intelligence. And this story began in 1985 when he published this paper. And Rick Briggs was a scientist who published this official research paper, mentioned how Sanskrit is the best language for the development of artificial intelligence-based software. He represented his ideas and derived the outcome on artificial intelligence development and how natural language can be converted into a logical programming language. And I just highlighted at the very bottom here, NASA has an entire department dedicated to Sanskrit. So when you're looking at me going, wait a minute, Sean, you said one of these Vimanas looks like these NASA Apollo modulars at the top where the supposed astronauts actually sit during these missions. It looks just like a Vimana. And it's kind of a reach unless NASA has an interest in ancient India specifically for programming AI into a programming language, and they have an entire department dedicated to Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit, the word NASA means destruction. And this is actually the word NASA that's pulled from many of the most famous Indian literature of the Vedic texts. And these little addresses I put here to the side, these are all the different texts where this word NASA is used in context of their Vedic writings, which is like their Bible. So these are the addresses and the context of how this word NASA is used, and it's all the same type of use of word. Destruction, nose, destroyed, annihilation, vanquishing, the nostrils, completely finished, exhausted, dissipated, spoiled, lost, deviation, whose nose, of the nostril or nostrils. There is a strong correlation between NASA, the deception they're pulling, and their interest in ancient India's flying machines. And we're going to go over a little more deeper in how they have an actual patent for a Mercury engine in the Smithsonian that a guy in the 70s from NASA tried to make. But stick with us. We're going to go over a few more things later. So I guess I'll just stop real quick in case you have any questions or any thoughts. I know you probably have a lot of questions, but again, I'm giving it like a huge overview, so you're welcome to ask any questions you may have. Or if you saw a good question in the live chat.
You did. You said, "Oh, I'm telling people to kind of at me. I'm trying to copy and paste them and tell them they can send them to Kofi." I will say, it's just a lot of gravy, man. I'm just trying to soak in the gravy, dude. Like that's crazy that they. Well, for one, it's crazy that word is tied to destruction in Sanskrit. You always hear the Nasa, Nasha, deceive, rise up and deceive, right, in Hebrew, but you never hear about the Sanskrit thing. I I do remember you mentioning that to me though a while back, but like the whole NASA Sanskrit connection, but it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would say that makes perfect sense though, right? That like these UFOs that we don't know about probably do come from ancient times. I'm sure that we would agree that some of the technology and information comes from back then, and then maybe the source of it is a little bit crazier than people think. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what I want to ask the people at home, certainly if you're new to the channel and you maybe still believe NASA or something, like why is NASA so obsessed with ancient mythos? And that should be a pretty intriguing question for you. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, in modernity, they should be creating their own mythos if they were legit, right? All the new modern traditions and legends that they should be creating with their Apollo missions, their Mars rovers, everything that they claim that they're doing. 200 years from now, 500 years from now, these will be the stories that people would be repeating, as in, oh man, these amazing engineers and scientists that got us to Mars, if all that was even real, which we know it's not. So, like, why do they care about ancient tech? Why do they care about ancient programming languages? Why do they care so much they have an entire department inside NASA dedicated to this stuff? Why are they calling their missions after Greek god names, patterning their orbs or their vessels after ancient Indian vimanas that were attributed to the gods? There's a weird fascination and obsession here that doesn't make sense if you were truly doing what you were claiming and supposedly progressing humanity into the future, right? None of it makes sense.
Well, yeah, it's also interesting, right? Because they claim to be going to space or going to what is in the sky, and of course, all the stories tell us that's where these beings came from. All the stories. You can just throw the Bible out, and you can still find dozens of claims all across the world throughout all of history that beings came from the sky and taught them how to read and to write and taught them all kinds of secrets, and they worshiped them as gods and gave them order and helped them build civilization, etc. So that's what's so intriguing. They're claiming to go up there where they've named the planets after gods. And then not to a whole huge topic in there, but like Enoch does kind of warn of this. Enoch warns that people will err in their ways and not interpret the sky and even err and take them to be gods. And I know that's a whole rabbit hole, right? But that's what's interesting to me is that where they're claiming to go, for them to be obsessed with the ancient gods, that's pretty crazy, right? Like that's probably not a coincidence.
I'm actually going to put forward my theory on where they claim to go and where they're actually going at the end of this.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm right there with you, man. That was my first thought too. So when they say the gods live in the heavens and they come down, I'm like, well, that's not the heaven the Bible describes. So what are you talking about? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, why is there such a stark difference? And your gods, your bloodthirsty, cannibalistic, extremely unrighteous, quote unquote, little g gods, wouldn't be allowed into heaven, into the biblical heaven, right? Like, there's a total contrast there, right? So yeah, I'm right there with you, man. I try to address it and offer my theory at the end of this, as far as why all this matters and why we should at least take the research seriously and maybe look into it. Like Eddie Bravo says, man, just look into it, man.
Look into it, bro.
Look into it. So the next portion I want to talk about is Zeus, Anubis, and Osiris. Some of the most famous ancient gods from ancient India. These particular three gods have like a cult following. People get them tattooed all over themselves. They make special artifacts, merchandise, shoes, all kinds of things. These specific, you know what? That's actually a typo. It should say Ra, Anubis, and Osiris. I'm so sorry. I'll fix the typo later. But so let me go through this real quick. Revelation 13's hierarchy just gives you this whole idea of what's going to go on for the 42 months leading up to the return of Jesus Christ, the Messiah of Nazareth, Yeshua of Nazareth. And in the middle of this book, it says there's this crazy time where the dragon, all the world is worshiping the dragon, which other passages in chapter 17 and chapter 20 calls him Satan. And then this other character shows up called the first beast, and the dragon gives his authority to the first beast. So the first beast in Revelation 13, 7 through 10, he receives his authority from the dragon to conquer all the nations. And it says he goes out to make war against the nations. This is why Yeshua and the book of Revelation speaks about this 42-month time period. Even the book of Daniel, chapter 7, It speaks about this time period as a time of tribulation and distress, unlike the world has ever seen before. So for 42 months, he's trying to make war against the saints, that's people who believe in God, and persecute them, as well as making war against the nations themselves. The second beast is also mentioned in chapter 13, and this particular character forces the nations to worship the first beast, who was given authority from the dragon. So it's like the whole hierarchical dynamic. They try to focus and promote the first beast. So we're going to break down historically who these characters were and why it matters to everything that we've been talking about so far. So across the cultures, from Greek to Egyptian to India, Zeus, Ra, Brahma, same head patron god who controlled lightning and was the god of thunder, the god of storms. Also called Baal, that we see often used in the Bible. People don't realize that when it's talking about the temple to the temple at Pergamum in Revelation chapter 2, that was the place of the greatest temple to Zeus in the entire Middle East. So Zeus to the Greeks was Ra to the Egyptians, was Baal to the Canaanites, or the serpent tied with Baal. He was well known. He was synonymous throughout all these cultures as the head patron god. And to the Indians, he was called Brahma. Hades, the Greek word, Anubis, the Egyptian word, and Vishnu, which is the Indian word. So this is the guy that synonymously throughout all three cultures, the god of the underworld, who was the right-hand man of the patron god, until another one came along. So this is the second beast of Revelation. The first beast of Revelation came along and usurped the second beast and became the right-hand man throughout history, later to the dragon. And this is Apollo, Osiris, also called Shiva. Apollo was the Greek name. That's the word used in Revelation chapter 9 for the one who comes out of the pit and is the king over these other things that come out of the pit, and the one that goes to make war against the nations, the first beast in Revelation 13, 7 through 10. He's also called Osiris to the ancient Egyptians and Shiva to the ancient Indians. This is the unholy trinity, if you will. Ra, Osiris, and Anubis, depicted all over the place in Egyptian hieroglyphs as the three head gods. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And in case you guys aren't aware of Indian theology, Vishnu, the one in the middle there, he has multiple avatars that showed up. This is what they claim anyway, that he's the most popular god in ancient India. He had multiple avatars that showed up throughout time, and the ninth avatar became the Buddha, which became the most popular that you hear the most about today, and they build the most shrines and statues to today. So whenever you see the Buddha, you're literally looking at an avatar version of Vishnu, who's the second beast of Revelation. So just talking about how they are all synonymous throughout the cultures. The dragon that's mentioned in Revelation, the Greeks called him Zeus, the Egyptians called him Ra or Nehebka, the Indians called him Brahma or Narada, and Sumer, also called Babylon, they called him Enki. The Mayans called him Quetzalcoatl, the flying serpent god. The Germania, they called him Odin. In Israel, they called him Azazel and Satan. So in 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 1, it says, Azazel taught men. This is part of those 200 rebellious angels that came down before the flood. It says, Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, the bracelets and ornaments and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids and all kinds of costly stones and all coloring tinctures. All these gods that are referred to under the patron god of Ra, Zeus, and Brahma, they're all considered gods of war. What did Azazel teach mankind before the flood? How to make weapons, how to make war. So in 1 Enoch chapter 6, like I said, he was a part of the 200. I personally think that the 200, the 199 of them were under Samyaza's leadership, as it says above, but he was the one that came down with them that gets a different punishment, as we're going to explain. So in 1 Enoch chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, please ignore the AI images on the right. I was just trying to find some pictures of male angels. It's hard. Did you know it's really difficult to find pictures of male angels that are not either naked or extremely effeminate? So it's like an agenda out there, man. It's crazy. If they're not female angels, which the Bible doesn't describe female angels ever, it's only male angels. So in 1 Enoch 10, 1 through 3, the Most High, the Holy One, the Great One spoke, and he said, he sent Uriel to the son of Lamech, that's Noah. He said to him, go to Noah and tell him in my name, hide yourself, and reveal to him the end that's approaching, that the whole earth will be destroyed and a deluge is about to come upon the whole earth and will destroy all that's in it. Now instruct him that he may escape and his seed may be preserved for all the generations of the world. So I'm highlighting on the right-hand side, there's 4 angels involved in what we're about to read for Noah to be warned about the flood and the other 3 that are about to do punishment to the rebellious watchers and their offspring, the Nephilim. So Raphael, he then gets sent to Azazel. In 1 Enoch chapter 10, 4 through 8, and again, the Lord said to Raphael, bind Azazel hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, let him abide there forever. Now, I want to make a quick note. In the Hebrew, this word forever doesn't always mean endless time. It's a word called olam. It can mean a long span of time, an age, or it can mean eternity. So we see all these other descriptions in the book of Enoch, how Azazel actually gets out and is the lion who roams around seeking he may devour, leading up to the return, the second coming of the Messiah. So in the context of this, the word olam is translated as forever, but it means a long span of time. And there's more. I'm just giving you, again, a quick high overview of all these concepts. But if you read the first book of Enoch, you'll see there's more description given about these punishments for these rebellious angels. And it didn't take place immediately. So the moment that the Almighty said to Enoch, go and declare, or to Raphael in this moment, go and declare to Azazel his punishment, it didn't mean that it was happening immediately, because you get further expounding text, which tells you the process of events before that punishment takes place. So this one is talking about Raphael goes to Azazel and tells him you'll be cast in the earth, and then on the day of great judgment, you'll be cast into the fire, and heal the earth which the angels have corrupted, and proclaim the healing of the earth, that they may heal the plague, and that the children of men may not perish through all the secret things the watchers have disclosed and have taught their sons. And the whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. So he stands out amongst the other rebellious watchers. 1 Enoch 10, 9 through 10, and to Gabriel said the Lord, proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, against the children of fornication, destroy the children of the watchers from amongst men, send them one against another, that they may destroy each other in battle. For length of days shall not they have. No request that they make of you shall be granted unto their fathers on their behalf, for they hope to live an eternal life, and that each of them will live 500 years. So Gabriel is sent to the Nephilim. These are the reprobates, the children of fornication, the children of the watchers. He's sent to them to create civil war amongst them, and they'll all be dead within 500 years. So you start getting more details about how these punishments are going to take place. Later in chapter 15, you see the watchers are going to be alive before they're cast to Tartarus, and before they're punished, they're allowed to stay so they can see this 500 years pass and all their children kill each other and become what we know today as unclean spirits, because they lose their original bodies. So there's a ton of story here that makes much more sense with the New Testament. Again, I'm giving you a high-level overview today. 1 Enoch chapter 10, 11 through 12, the Lord said to Michael, go bind to Samyaza and his associates who've united themselves with women so as to defile themselves with them in all their uncleanness. When their sons have slain one another and they've seen the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them fast for the 70 generations in the valley of the earth till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, till the judgment that is forever and ever is consummated. Again, we use this term forever and ever as it's a semantic range of the use of the word olam in Hebrew. As we see in 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 1:6, these rebellious angels who are bound in Tartarus actually are brought out at the great white throne judgment so they can be judged and thrown in the lake of fire and destroyed. So this is not Catholic theology. Catholic theology teaches eternal conscious torment, that you're going to be in a fire reanimating forever, never getting out of the fire, and for forever in agony and pain. That's not what the Bible describes. The Bible describes the second death as the lake of fire, which destroys both your body and your soul. There's nothing left of you after that. The word destroy is the finality of extinction. You're done. You're out of the game. No more retries. No more respawning. You're done. That's how the creator is going to have peace on the earth forever, as he has to actually get rid of, removes from creation those who reject his ways. So the first beast, now that we went over the history of the dragon and who he's considered to be throughout all these cultures, the first beast, this is why he's always represented as a serpent in all these cultures. The first beast is considered his right-hand man at this point. And in Greece, they called him Apollyon or Helios. Now, Apollyon is a unique name because it's considered the lord of the locusts in ancient Greece. And in Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 through 11, you see that he comes out of the bottomless pit 42 months before the second coming of Messiah, starts warring against the nations, and he's the king over these other things that come out of the pit as well, who are described in a locust manner. Excuse me. To the Egyptians, they called him Osiris. And we're going to read some quotes from different Egyptian texts that directly tell you he's the only god that is perished but is destined to come back. No other god in the pantheon of Egypt was ever promised that. In Babylon, Hammurabi and Baal was considered to many, and then the Canaanites, Akkadians, they called him Baal as well, and then Israel and Nimrod would be his name from Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. So Osiris, technically the god of fertility, agriculture, and the afterlife, the dead, resurrection, life, and vegetation, and his name transliterated from the Greek as Osiris in its original form in Egyptian, the Egyptian language was Ashur. So Ashur was the head of the Assyrian pantheon of gods and the patron deity over the city of Nimrod. So we have the direct correlation. Now we're into Assyria, which used to be the capital of Babylon before Babylon was. But of the Babylon Empire, for a large span of time in history, Assyria was the capital. So now they're worshiping whom the Egyptians thought was Osiris. And the Hebrews knew exactly who he was as well. This is why Genesis chapter 10, 6 through 14 in the Septuagint, specifically, because unfortunately it has better details than the Masoretic, it mentions someone in verse 8 called Nimrod, which is the same name that we see in Jubilees chapter 8 in the book of Jubilees. It's the Greek transliteration for Nimrod. And it says Nimrod was a giant hunter before the Lord. And in the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon, and then Orek and Akkad and Elaine and the land of Shinar. So it just says that he was establishing a kingdom, not just one city, not just one territory, but he was establishing an empire. That was where the Babylonian Empire came from. So in Micah chapter 5, both in the Masoretic and in the Septuagint, it calls the land of Assyria the land of Nimrod, matching the historical claims from Assyria, matching the correlations to ancient Egypt. So in the 16th dynasty, and later there, grew up a class of literature. These are songs they sang that we can now find in the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They were originally put on papyrus. They called Osiris the god of resurrection and represented by such works as the Book of Respirations, the Lamentations of Isis and Nephthys, the festival songs of Isis and Nephthys, the litanies of Seeker, and the like, and the hymns and prayers of which are addressed to Osiris rather as the god of the dead and the type of resurrection than as the successor of the great cosmic god Timun Ra. So we're going to explain what that cosmic word means, by the way, in the Hebrew towards the end. But Osiris, is the one that's called the soul that lives again. That's why he was considered the god of the resurrection. And his main symbol that he used was the Ankh, which looks like a cross with a little circle on top of the cross. He is the being who becomes a child again. He's the firstborn son of unformed matter, the Lord of multiple aspects and forms, the Lord of time and bestower of years, the Lord of life for all eternity. Now, I'm not agreeing with all these mantras they put into their hymns and their songs as they worshiped him. I'm just saying, in all the pantheons, Apollo to the Greeks, Osiris to the Egyptians, and Shiva, who lives and dies because he's the destroyer who creates and rebirths life. These are the only three people in all their pantheons that was always someone that's going to come back on the earth. Coincidentally, the book of Revelation says Apollyon, which was one of the Greek, it's actually technically a Latin transliteration of Apollo, was he comes up out of the bottomless pit and goes to make war against the nations. So the same Bible that claims that God sent his son to save our souls through confession of sin and to give us eternal life, John 3:16, that same book claims that this guy, through using one of his Greek names, technically is one of his Latin transliterated names, is going to come out of the bottomless pit below the earth and go make war against the nations 42 months before the second coming of Messiah. I didn't make the claim. I'm just translating the words and the definitions throughout different cultures. So it's a wild, the Bible is an amazing book that makes wild claims, that has historical validation. You don't have to guess who the Antichrist is going to be. You're staring at him. This is the one that comes out and is given the authority of the dragon to make war against the nations and kill anyone who believes in Christ. So in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, they always had this thing called the Djed that was in the center of the gods. It's on the boat of Ra on the left-hand side. There's what they call an erection ceremony where they would put this pillar up in between the two gods. You got what's his name? Thoth on the left and then Ra on the right in between this pillar. This pillar is called the Djed, and it was the personification of the wisdom of Ra, specifically of the eye of Ra. And they used to do ceremonies worshiping this thing. Remember, personification means this was like a statue they erected to represent something else. So the other thing that it represented was the eye of Ra that was in the sky, that had the power and the wisdom of Ra to resurrect Osiris back to life. This was their belief set. It's in museums next to other ancient trinkets and amulets that have to do with Osiris. This is the staff of Ra next to a Djed, next to an Ankh. The wisdom of Ra resurrects Osiris through the authority of Ra. And by the way, the staff of Ra was considered a form of a Vajra that he carried around. So in Revelation 9:11, they have a king over them, the angel of the abyss. The word angel just means messenger. It doesn't mean a glorified being from heaven every single time. It also has a definitional semantic range of use because it can be applied in context in different ways. This messenger of the abyss, in his name, Hebrew is Abaddon, which means destruction. And in the Greek, he has the name Apollyon or Apollo. The god of destruction, the god of the locusts. And in Joel 2, Yahweh promises the faithful of Israel, I will return to you what the locust has eaten. And if you have ever studied the book of the minor prophet Joel, you understand there's a lot of end times prophecy in there. Very interesting. The second beast, right? Remember, we're going over the hierarchy in Revelation 13 of the dragon, the first beast, and the second beast. The second beast, throughout history in Greece, they called him Hermes or Hades. The Egyptians called him Anubis. In India, they called him Vishnu. The Babylonians called him Enkidu and Nergal. Akkadians, they called him Era. And I couldn't find his name in Israel because in the Bible, he's only called Nergal, which is the Babylonian name. We see this in Jeremiah and 2 Kings, as you can see highlighted here. The men of Babylon made Sukkot Benat. The men of Kut made Nergal, and they worshipped him. And this was his hieroglyph or his bust on the right. And he was considered the scorpion god, the god of war, a lion-headed god. He was considered a hybrid. He was considered having the tail of a stinger and the head of a lion. He also had these three dogs. These three dogs he carried with him that he called like the dogs of hell, because he was considered the god of the underworld. And he also had the caduceus, as you see on the left-hand side of the picture, because he was a god of healing. That's interesting. So in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, this is the big question everyone always asks about the mark of the beast. But let's look at which beast that's referenced in chapter 13 actually gives the mark. In Revelation 13, 16 through 17, it says, the second beast required all people, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, so no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, the name of the beast, or the number of its name. Here is a call for wisdom. Let the one who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and that number is 666. It's not 666, it's 666, right? So when you break down the gematria of the Greek words for who this person is, since we got the Greek Apollo, we got the Greek Zeus, who was the other person in their unholy trinity? It was Hermes. You break down the Greek, you end up with 353.666. And this is not a coincidence that Hermes fits 3 times. This is a part of their sacred geometry, that the number of Hermes was the diameter of 3 spheres, which fit inside of 2 spheres, which the 4 twos represented Apollo. All of those 2 spheres, that their diameters fit inside with overlap. They fit inside of a larger sphere of 3s that represented Zeus. This is a part of this Greek gematria. And it does make an eye in the middle. So just keep that in mind. The gematria of this quote unquote unholy trinity, I'm just using that term for quick reference, fits inside of a sphere intentionally. So I don't know, Austin, do you remember like in 2011 when Obama, or I think it was 2012 when Obama got reelected, they had this huge statue of Anubis that they put on a barge and floated throughout the United States?
I didn't
Like,
even know that. No, that sounds insane.
yeah, so here it is. It's near the Brooklyn Bridge and then the Statue of Liberty. But yeah, I went like they took this thing to like they put it at the, of course, you know, they put it at the Denver airport for like a month and took pictures of it. They took it to San Francisco. Like they toured it. It literally, they called it the tour of Anubis, and it went for like 9 months or 10 months all over the United States.
What? That's so weird.
Yeah, I know it doesn't make. He even had a little suitcase, as you see next to the statue, that they used for photo ops.
Like they like put him through all the rivers and stuff.
Yeah, they floated it through all the rivers to, and I guess at one point they had to like take him off the barge so they could take him to Denver and different stops. But yeah, we already know the Statue of Liberty represents Columbia, which is a female form of Apollo from ancient Greece. And here's a convenient photo up with the first.
Hey,
and second.
real fast. Have you ever heard about that? Some people say it's like Lucifer, right, or whatever. And there's like some statue. I guess if you look at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty, there's chains that are broken on her feet, and then they find the statue that's called Lucifer that has the angel with chains on it. You've heard about that?
I've seen those pictures, those comparisons, and I've been to the Statue of Liberty, but I was younger and I didn't notice those chains because I was younger and I wasn't looking for it, you know. So I would love to go back and investigate, you know, that because
You know what's so funny? It's totally unrelated. Not to be careful how I say this, but when I was on tour, the world had lost its mind and everyone acted like we were in a prison, you know. And I went to go there, and they wouldn't let me go to the Statue of Liberty because I wouldn't muzzle myself and play along. So I didn't get to see it. That's all I'm saying. I wanted to go see it too, but I didn't get to see it. But
what was that, like 2020 or 2021?
yeah, 21. So
Yeah.
you're saying it's Apollo, and it has a whole history, and it looks like
It's
a dude,
a cross-dressing. Apollo is a cross-dressing god, and so this is supposed to act like they call it a woman, but it's not.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's a Michelle statue.
Yeah, it's the Statue of Liberty. Liberty was one of the names for, I think the Roman name for one of the Greek gods, Diana, which was the female version of Apollo.
Okay.
Now, so there's a lot of representations in this ancient mythology or these ancient theologies of how they worship their gods. Remember earlier I talked about that little pillar in ancient Egypt that looked like a coil, you know, it had like the coil rings at the top, and it was called the Djed pillar, which translates as serpent wisdom, by the way, the word Djed. So they had this coil that they did these ceremonies that represented the wisdom of Ra and the eye of Ra. In the same way, many of the ancient gods of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece that were female gods represented the wisdom of Zeus or the eye of Ra in a female goddess form personification. So we're gonna talk about that briefly here in just a minute. But this is in the Vatican. What is Hermes doing in the Vatican?
Bro.
In fact, so this is a specific form of Hermes. When the Romans took over Egypt, they actually renamed Hermes they renamed Anubis as Hermanubis because they referred to Mercury and Hermes, knowing it was the same god as Anubis. but because they were going to give it a name that people could recognize, they renamed it Hermanubis. So this is a statue of Hermanubis in the Vatican. Why? I'm like that meme of that preacher. He's like, why? What? No, like, why would you like? Aren't you supposed to destroy the idols if you're representing Christ and you're following the scriptures? Why would you have one of the literal idols in your house? So anyway, it makes no sense because we're, the next episode of our 42 series, we're doing a full expose on Catholicism and how it plays out in Revelation and everything. So, but yeah, man, that's crazy. And this isn't the only thing that we're going to look at the Vatican today. So again, stay with us. Who is this guy? I'm trying to remember the name of this guy who makes this wine. He's like the lead singer of Tool, I think.
Oh, I don't know, but if that's the case, it's
It's either the lead singer of Tool or Nine Inch Nails. But look at this. He's got the caduceus behind the 353. Remember, what was the gematria of Hermes' name? He literally named the wine caduceus. And he says at the top, the staff of the god of Hermes. So like he knows, and it's Anubis 2011, 2014. At the top, he calls it Hermes. He has the gematria 353 inside the sphere, like I talked about. Like all the symbols there of the occult all perfectly line up. Anubis is Hermes, is Mercury, is Nergal, is Enkidu. It's all the same god. They know who this is. And to the Egyptians, this was Anubis, was represented as many people falsely think it's the dog. It's actually a wolf. And it's a specific desert wolf that it's commonly referred to as a jackal, but it's the desert wolf in ancient Egypt. And that's where people think it looks like a dog, but it's technically not. In ancient Greece, the wolf was a god, a massive wolf that was a part of like in some of their tales and things, but he was one of the gods. Like I said before, Nergal, which is the Babylonian Assyrian representation of Anubis and Hermes, was a lion-headed hybrid. And so you have the god of war. This is a specific statue from ancient Egypt on the right-hand side. This is the statue of Anubis. It's a rare statue with him in a lion form with a regular human head sitting on this specific platform that has the 9 bows of Egypt, which means he's the god of war of Egypt. So just in case you weren't aware, Anubis, the Sphinx-looking thing, represents Anubis. So there's no mystery here. You just have to believe what Egyptology has already said. The only mystery is people that are trying to get you to do tourism. There's no mystery here. This has all been established long ago. They know who Anubis is. The Romans specifically knew the personificated forms of Anubis, in which they literally created a new god about 2,200 years ago when they took over Egypt. And they said, oh, well, we worship the same god. His name is Hermes. But we're going to keep his dog form, his wolf form, but we're going to call him Hermanubis. Like, it's out there, guys. All the information's out there. This is not mysterious stuff. You just have to, I just spent a lot of time researching, putting it together, and checking my work. So this is where, like I said, Nergal to the Assyrians, to the Mesopotamians. On the left-hand side, this is a modern version. Someone online made Nergal in his lion form with the stinger tail. So in case you read the book of Revelation chapter 9, you're like, what are these things that are popping out of from the pit of the earth that have the teeth of a lion, the face of a lion, the teeth of a lion, the hair of a lion, the body of a man, and the stingers of a tail, and they're flying? This weird amalgamation chimera being described in Revelation chapter 9. If you knew the ancient gods and how they personified the first and second beast, it makes perfect sense, guys. Revelation is not that hard. We just have to know history. All right. Before I move on to the next segment, which is about to get really cray-cray, any other questions that you saw that you want to ask, or any you may have?
I have a few I copied down. One of them is, why does Sean, this is from Paul, why does Sean not see the first beast of Revelation 13 as the Roman Catholic Church system as all the Protestant reformers did?
That's a big claim that all the Protestant reformers all had that same conclusion. Because again, like I know you just asked that question that was asked several minutes ago, but in my last few statements, like I said, if you just research history, you can start to see. We know who the dragon is. It tells you in Revelation. We know who the first beast is in Revelation 17:8. Revelation chapter 11, I think it's verse 13, and then Revelation 13, 7 through 10, as well as Revelation 9, 1 through 11. That beast that comes up out of the pit is the one who receives all authority from the dragon to make war against the nations and persecute the saints. So he's directly named as Apollyon. If you know history, that's a person who has a long history, who the nations used to worship. So that's why I don't give the Roman Catholic Church as the spot for the first beast. As I'll be talking about in my next 42 series episode, the Roman Catholic Church is actually the whore, the woman riding Mother Babylon that we see in Revelation 17. And I go over that in great depth, and I'll explain all that. But so yeah, just disagreement there.
Yeah, so not unrelated, misplaced position in the story, basically.
Right.
Cool. The other one, Nakia, is Satan, Satan, the only fallen angel loose, or just Satan and unclean spirits?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first part of that.
Yeah, it's kind of not a. It says, is Satan the only fallen angel loose, or just Satan and unclean spirits? I'm not. I mean, it doesn't really make a ton of sense.
The unclean spirits are the disembodied unclean spirits of the former Nephilim from before the flood. So they're under the authority of the only remaining angel who rebelled before the flood, which is Azazel, commonly referenced as Satan.
Gotcha.
So that's what Jubilees chapter 10 directly tells you, that there was 100% of these unclean spirits that all lost their bodies from the warfare leading up to the flood, and maybe some in the flood too. Now they're disembodied spirits, but the Almighty says to them, you can't go to heaven because you were created on the earth and you're unclean. You weren't intended anyway. And I'm just going to send you down to one of the compartments of Sheol until the day of great judgment. But Azazel, who was still out, hadn't received his actual punishment yet. His punishment was announced, but it hadn't taken place yet because it's not that point in the story. He actually pleads with the Almighty and says, can I have some of them under my control so that I can do my bidding against mankind? And according to Jubilees chapter 10, he was given 10% of the unclean spirits under his control. So this is why you see throughout the rest of the Bible, even in the days of Christ walking the earth and kicking unclean spirits out of people, they all have this supernatural knowledge of who Christ is and history and prophecy in the future, and they're under the authority of Satan, but that's the origin of what we consider unclean spirits or demons, and that's why the Satan character that tempts Christ in Luke 4, Matthew 4, that's why he has control over him. All this has happening around the flood. The flood was extremely significant in biblical history, but many churches don't even believe it was real.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You got issues.
Yeah, I think another thing that's really, for people that don't know, I mean, also Enoch basically tells you that not only, the idea of them trying to petition the Creator using Enoch to say, please forgive us and forgive our sons as well. They didn't do anything, right? And he's like, no, not only am I not going to forgive you guys, I'm going to make you watch them destroy each other. And then you go look at all the other ancient civilizations, and they're all stories about these gods fighting, or these titans fighting, right? Or the Clash of the Titans. You have modern movies made about it. It's pretty interesting. Even some of the depictions you were showing earlier, they're fighting, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I mentioned that. It's imagine, theoretically, right, these giants actually fighting. That would be insane destruction, I would imagine, right? You probably would have some crazy stuff happen there. So yeah, I find it all very fascinating. I think that if you've done any research into history at all, you found out that giants were real and that we've been lied to about it. And then it seems like this disembodied spirits is from the Nephilim, and then they really run with that idea too, right? Like modern times, people just run around throwing the word demon every which way, and anyway, pretty fascinating to tie it together.
Some of my interviews on my channel, I'll ask some of the pastors I interview, so where do demons come from? Because most modern churches, they don't have the Book of Enoch in their collection of Bibles. You have to go like overseas, you know, and so so they're kind of uninformed on what Enoch explains, and they'll just look at me and they won't have an answer. They'll go, oh well, you know, some people think they're fallen angels because there's a dominant modern theory that Satan rebelled from heaven and took a third of the angels with him because of some wording in Revelation chapter 12. But that is not what the entire previous portions of all the scriptures explain about who Satan is, where he came from, and where these unclean spirits came from. And why these unclean spirits never have a chance for redemption. They were made fallen to begin with. They were made as what Deuteronomy calls them, the shades, or what the book of the Apocalypse of Baruch will call them, the specters. They were made different. They weren't not made like a man. So there's no resurrection ever offered to them ever.
They weren't even supposed to exist, right? Like they were a result of rebellion, right? Yeah, exactly.
Right. They're living their best life now, and that's all they're going to get. Mankind is promised to have a better life, an abundant life at the resurrection, millennial reign, and into eternity. Rebellious angels are promised to be destroyed in the lake of fire, along with these unclean spirits at the appropriate judgment time. And so this is why, you know, it was such an egregious thing for these rebellious angels to make these unclean spirits through birthing them through women and manipulating the process, because they were basically like, I mean, they're forcing the creator to move with extreme judgment on these entities he didn't want to create. He didn't intend for this. So this is where, you know, you start getting into deep philosophy, Christian philosophy, as far as like, how much did God understand? How much does the creator know is going to happen in the future? You know, you get into like forms of Calvinistic theology and Augustinian philosophy and thought, determinism, and versus, you know, what some people will call middle knowledge or open theism. And you get into all these conjectures and theories that Christians argue about all the time, as far as like, why did God let some of this stuff happen? But honestly, guys, if you look closely, throughout the entire Bible, even in the days of Noah, who's Second Peter says he's a preachers of righteousness, in this time period that we're talking about before the flood, when you have rebellious angels, super beings here on the earth, creating these weird hybrid like they're non-human, these Nephilim, and they're destined for destruction. They're called shades. They have some sort of ability to do, they're big, they're giants as well. So like Noah's living in this environment, and yet he still walks in the ways of the Almighty. He still walks without compromise, to the point where he's called complete or perfect in his generations. And he says in Genesis 6 that he walked with God, or he walked with Elohim. Like, that is an incredible compliment that like very few people in the Bible get. So we see that even in the face of staring at Satan himself, Christ, who also walked in the ways of the Almighty, the commandments, he didn't bat an eye. He didn't back down at all. They don't have power over you if you walk in the ways of the Creator. You then have power over them. So even though these rebellious angels tried to manipulate the situation and create something that could overcome mankind, as a fellow, you know, sentient being of mankind, all you have to do is put your faith in the Creator, walk in His commandments, and they can't touch you. So I just want to encourage people with that. I know we're dealing with some heavy things, you know what I mean? But don't be afraid. Be not afraid, as the Bible says 365 times. All you got to do is trust in God, walk in His ways, and you have authority over these things. They can't touch you. Just like Christ, He told Satan, "Get out of here." Satan flew away like lightning.
There you go, man. Beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. But let me finish this real quick, and because we got some crazy stuff to get into here. This is we've talked about Ra, the head patron god of Egypt, a lot. His Greek counterpart being Zeus, his Indian counterpart being Brahma. But now let's talk about eclipses. And this is where, you know, it's okay. It is absolutely okay, Austin. I know if you disagree with this, this is a theory that I'm putting forward. It's okay if you disagree. But there's just a lot of historical, interesting, and scientific probability and validation that this could be, I could be onto something. So we'll see what people think. So in ancient Egypt, the all-seeing eye, the eye of Ra inside the triangle, Ra represented the sun god, but the all-seeing eye was always something that eclipsed the sun in their hieroglyphs. And a lot of people overlook this. So the eclipse throughout history has always been a time where the pagans went wild, and they always worshipped the false gods heavier during the eclipses. You ever wonder why the world goes crazy when there's an eclipse? It's not anything new. This is a long-standing thing in history. So the eclipse is a fascinating thing. We're told in the heliocentric model, the sun and moon look the same size, even though they're great distances from each other, that the sun is 400 times larger, but 400 times further away. And so through the optical illusion, it looks as if they're the same size. And then from time to time, the sun will go behind the moon, or the moon will cross in front of the sun and create this eclipse. And every time this happens, all the nations stop and stare. Why? Why is this such a big deal? Because apparently there's I think it's called the ephemeris chart. And there's they know when these things are going to happen. NASA predicts them through this astrology chart. But in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the hawk-headed god was Ra, and above him was the sun with another little circle inside the sun. A lot of people never ask, what is this? What is this other little circle inside the sun? Why not just put the sun over his head? He's the sun god, right? But as you see in these little, in the center screen here, between these two people sitting in this chair in this hieroglyph, there's another depiction of the sun with something in the middle of it that's causing a strange shadow. This is all over the place in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Again, we see this. Obviously, we know it's symbolic for secret societies, and the different things itself is the all-seeing eye at the top of the pyramid. But then you have Ra depicted as a man with a sun over his head and a beetle in the center of the sun. This is very interesting, guys, because if you actually look in the Septuagint, one of the plagues of Egypt where it says the flies, or I think it's the lice, it's actually translated in the Septuagint as the beetles. So there's so much here. I'm just giving you a high-level overview of why this is significant. There's other carvings and busts of symbols of Ra as the beetle with wings who flies, holding up a black sphere above his head. This is very common. There's actually an entire Egyptian god dedicated to this idea. His name is Khepri, the sun god. He's another avatar or another version of Ra. He's usually depicted as a human with a beetle on his head. And it's very interesting because why? Why a black beetle? So the beetle itself, it rolls poop. This is what's so funny about this little creature, this insect. This is a dung ball. So this is the beetle who's gone across the sands of Egypt and is looking for particles of poo that he can roll into a ball and make a little place to put his eggs into so they can hatch. So he's literally the dung beetle. This is where you get the idea. The androgynous hermaphrodite, Baphomet, LGBTQ rainbow mafia, booty-loving god of Ra is represented by a dung beetle. It doesn't get more ironic than that. And this is what is worshipped as a god, is a beetle depiction of Ra. Now, what's interesting is there's a whole bunch of different types of beetles, and they all thought they were extremely special in ancient Egypt. But this particular one actually had a special shell on it that basically refracted light off of it. It is a unique kind of thing. The beetles are kind of fascinating. The backs, the shells that they have. So again, go watch part 19 of our episode, Investigating Babylon, Eclipses and the Eye of Ra, and I go into great detail, like 2.5 hours worth of detail with clips. I even have a nice nostalgic clip with Rob Skiba in there. But I'm giving you the high level overview for the sake of time tonight, so we can get to everything else I want to explain as well. But as we know, there's this strange thing, Austin, that these eclipses only happen during new moon phases, right?
Yeah,
and we're always like, why? Why does that makes no sense? And then of course, people with astronomers with extremely expensive cameras can't seem to find the moon leading up to the eclipse event, which is really weird. Did you know anyone in the past on April 8th that was able to see the moon before and
No.
after the eclipse?
No.
Okay, so this previous eclipse, this last go around, we still don't know anyone that's actually been able to track the moon before the eclipse, during the eclipse, and after the eclipse. Yeah, because NASA themselves, they claim that the eclipse always happens during the new moon phase, when there's no light on the moon. That still doesn't make tell me what you think about this, Austin. That still doesn't make any sense to me, because if you still have a light source behind a body, just because there's no light shining on the front of the body, you still should see it backlit, right?
You would think you would be able to see it backlit, yeah.
So I've never understood that.
I actually don't know what the response to that is.
So here's just, a couple documentations from 2017 and from times in the past that it was always the new moon phase for these eclipses. Same thing in 2012, new moon, that's when the eclipse happened. So it's always, that's their claim, is that, it is the moon, but you just don't see it coming and going.
Well, I gotta say real quick, with the picture you just showed, where supposedly it's the moon in front of the sun, you clearly see it backlit. You see the rays of the light coming around it.
You mean on the bottom of the right-hand side of the picture, or the top left header of the news article?
There was another one on that you just had. I don't know where it was. I don't know. It was that one.
Yeah.
See that?
Yeah. But that's fake. That's that picture that someone put on a bed sheet. They put a marble on a bed sheet.
Oh, really?
I mean, they claim it's the light rays shooting around it, but I don't believe it at all.
What I'm saying is, even in their paradigm, if it was, right, that's saying that the light from the sun is going to backlight and wrap around, right?
Right.
Anyway, just side note, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I would never have come to this theory that I'm about to share with you had I've ever been able to see the moon approaching the sun for an eclipse and then leaving the sun from an eclipse. It's never there. And other people have tried to say on April 8th this year that the moon itself would have been actually, according to its calculation, would have been degrees off and would not have created an eclipse in its rotation if it was lit. But again, what we observe in our natural reality is that what the Bible describes is what we observe. There's 2 points of light in the sky. One rules the day, one rules the night. Just as 1 Enoch 72:37 says, in regards to size, they're both equal. This is from the prophet Enoch. So just in case, I know there's a lot of Christians out there that have been told that somehow the book of Enoch is bad. But guys, Jude quotes and calls him the prophet Enoch in Jude 14. So if you believe Hebrews chapter 1, which says God spoke to us through his prophets in many portions in many ways, and in these latter days he spoke through his son, then you must take into account the Hebrew guy Jude talking about one of his Hebrew prophets from antiquity, whom they all believed as a prophet, was Enoch. It was only until the 1st century AD, and then under the specific leadership of a Pharisaic rabbi named Rabbi Akiva, did he have the book of Enoch, Jubilees, and the Testament of 12 Patriarchs removed from the Jewish Old Testament canon. Before that, they all understood 1st Enoch was inspired scripture. It was never in question. So, a little bit of history there to help you understand. Enoch, a prophet of God, gets an entire tour of creation in the writings of Enoch. The angels explain to him, here's where the winds come in from the firmament on this side. Here's what causes hail, frost, and storm. Here's the foundations of the earth. Here's the foundations of the heaven. Here's the heavens themselves. Here's how the stars, moon, and the sun move inside their circuits and their circumferences. So if you want to go get a wonderful description of an enclosed cosmology from the scriptures, go to 1 Enoch chapter 72 through 82. It talks about the sun, moon, and stars in their orbit and their circumference in the heaven above. So these are being upheld in the firmament above. That means there's layers of firmament between you and what you see as this point of light in the sky. Enoch is being told by the angel that these points of light in the sky that are called luminaries, they're not called planets, they're not called orbs, they're not called gas giants, they're never going to go supernova. These points of light in the sky made by the Creator to shine down onto the earth are said to be the same size. And in 1 Enoch 77, it says they're 2 great luminaries. The size of the circumference of both is like. So we have 2 different times where he's told they're the exact same size. Further in chapter 77, he says, The moon becomes full exactly on the day when the sun sets in the west, and from the east she rises at night. The moon shines the whole night through till the sun rises over against her, and the moon is seen over against the sun. On the side where the light of the moon comes forth, there again she wanes till all the light vanishes, and all the days of the month are at an end, and her circumference is empty and void of light. So this is where I kind of agree. I've heard you in some debates in different times, Austin. You've talked about you think the moon might be plasma or a form of plasma or something. Mm-hmm. And I would tend to agree with that because that would make sense of how it charges up. Because again, please go read those chapters I just said where it gives you much more detailed explanation. It tells you that the moon gathers energy from the sun over the course of 14 days until it becomes full with light. And then it wanes for the next 14 days as it loses energy until there's nothing in it and it's void of light. The circumference is empty.
That's
so they
fire.
talk about people seeing things through the moon, things like that. I can't, validate those. Those are interesting claims. I can't validate them. But if the scriptures is true, then the circumference of this light is empty whenever it's what's considered a new moon phase, when it's lost all of its light. So this could be exactly why you don't see anything approaching a solar eclipse. So what is actually making the eclipse?
Yeah, great question.
Oh, excuse me. And this is where my crazy theory comes in. I'm sorry, I'm going to cough 1 second.
It's all good.
Water makes me cough.
I'm excited.
So Enoch 77, 15 through 17, and 3 months she makes of 30 days, and that at her time she makes 3 months of 29 days each. So it's telling you the different cycles and how it goes and accomplishes, because it moves faster than the sun in the heaven. So in which she accomplishes her waning in the first period of time, in the first portal for 177 days. And in the time of her going out, she appears for 3 months of 30 days each, and for 3 months she appears of 29 each. Excuse me. At night, she appears like a man for 20 days each time. It's interesting because you kind of see a face in the moon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it looks like a man's face in the moon sometimes, right? It's very fascinating because Enoch is saying she appears like a man for 20 days each time. And by day, she appears like the heaven. And there's nothing else in her save her light, which is the word for except for. So Enoch is telling you that when her circumference wanes of light, there's nothing else in it. And after she completes a specific cycle, there's nothing else in the moon except her light. So to me, that would make a lot of sense that this is somehow some sort of plasma that produces light. It would wane and wax throughout the months. So what the heck is this thing that actually crosses in front of the sun itself? That the whole world goes crazy over, makes a big deal out of. This is a 2015, a partial eclipse that someone took from high altitude, like 33,000 feet or something. And they showed that it looks like a dot crossing in front of the sun. And what's so wild is over the clouds, like this is a full video. Again, I didn't want to play it because I don't want to get the channel, impacted. But the shadow that you can see on the tops of the clouds is not covering half the earth. Like the shadow is covering like a small little swath, and it moves from right to left across the film, across the tops of the clouds. And you're like, bro, that is not a big object crossing in front of the light source.
Yeah, actually, I agree. I agree that it does make sense.
Just like we see in the Path of Totality from 2017, what they say 200 miles at its width, but then like 70 to 80 miles approximately at its path of totality. I thought the moon was the same size as the sun. So if it crosses in front of it to become completely eclipsing it, shouldn't half the earth be out of light?
Oh, they got excuses, bro. They got excuses.
Right. I'm just trying to apply a little basic common sense here of whatever is crossing in front of this thing is not the same size as the sun. And of course, we've seen these pictures that are easily debunked, right? With these are fabricated portrayals of light that doesn't happen in reality, and how they supposedly create eclipses with these small points of light. All right, so we're gonna flash back to first century BC poet speaking about Mount Olympus, the home of Zeus. It says, meanwhile, Olympus, the seat of sovereign sway, threw wide its portals, and in enclave, that's the meeting place, it fared the sire, the authority of the gods, and the king of all mankind, Zeus. And he summoned the immortals to his starry court, where high enthroned, the spreading earth he views, and Teucria's camp and Latium's fierce array. Beneath the double-gated dome, the gods were sitting. So this is an ancient Roman historian in a book trying to describe what they believed was happening on Mount Olympus with Zeus and the other gods enthroned amongst the stars, seeing the spreading earth below them, sitting under a double-gated dome. So in Acts 14, 11 through 13, it says, when the crowd saw that Paul, so this is 100, maybe not even 100 years after the quote we just had from that Roman poet, that Roman historian. Now we have Paul and Barnabas on missionary journeys in the first century AD, trying to spread the news of Christ. And they go into this town in Acts 14, and I believe it's in Macedonia. It says, when the crowd saw that Paul had done what Paul had done, they lifted up their voice in the Iconian language. The gods have come down to us in human form. Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, he brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates, hoping to offer a sacrifice along with the crowd. Now, if you read the rest of Acts 14, Paul and Barnabas have to tell these people, look, we're not Zeus and Hermes. Like, we're trying to tell you about Jesus Christ. Right? So they explain the misconception, right? But what do they say? In their confusion, because Paul just healed somebody in the crowd, they thought the gods have come down to them in human form. What do we read about from the ancient Vimanas from ancient India, how they were allowing the gods to traverse down to the earth? This was their perception. The gods lived in the sky. They needed vehicles to get down to the earth. That was their perception. And this is a synonymous perception throughout all these cultures. Mount Olympus, enthroned high above the spreading earth in its starry court. This was their perception. Well, this is pretty obvious. The United Nations shows a top-down A style map, right? But did you know that the wreath around this is literally the symbol for the throne of Zeus? It's the wreath of Zeus.
I did not know that.
What did the that Roman poet or that Roman historian say? The king of all mankind, Zeus, sits enthroned in a starry court high above the spreading earth.
Wow, yeah.
So who's the dragon in Revelation 13 that it says the world worships the dragon? Is Zeus, Ra, Satan, Azazel, the dragon, the one who deceives the entire world, as Revelation 17:12 says. Excuse me, Revelation 12:17 says. So this is in the United Nations, by the way. I just thought it was interesting that they one of their meeting rooms they formed in the wreath format.
Wow.
This is their General Assembly room. And, you know, we've probably seen pictures of this, most of us before. We've seen this, just a big meeting room, like an auditorium. But if you look at the ceiling, what is that? They have this unique sphere with something in the middle. So, fascinating. By the way, that's a separate video, but they also have a meditation room with an altar to Molech. And I show that. Yeah, it's crazy, man. I did a whole video, and it's like one of the most popular videos, like I think in the top 10 on my channel of videos viewed, is I show that there's like a stone altar in this meditation room in front of a painting of Molech. It's crazy.
Wow.
So we've got this unique design that you see here in the top of the United Nations. The same United Nations, whose symbol is a top-down view of all the continents and the seas wrapped in the wreath, the crown of Zeus.